On my 69th birthday, my daughter-in-law handed me a folder instead of a card. Inside, it was a draft of their long-term planning proposal outlining how my house could be transferred into their names for efficiency, how my care could be better managed, and how my presence in their home might be logistically difficult in the coming years. The paper didn't say happy birthday, but it might as well have said, "You're done now." I'm Lorraine Halberd, 69, and that was the moment I knew they had already begun writing me off. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The room smelled like lemon cake and furniture polish. My grandson was in the next room playing something loud and pixelated on the television. My son Joel wasn't their work. Again. It had been that way for years. She, his wife, Camille, sat across from me with her spine too straight and her eyes too kind. I remember her blouse was the same color as a robin's egg. She had even brought me tea, chamomile, with a sprig of something green in it. That tea was meant to soften the edges of what she was about to do. The folder sat between us on the little marble table I once bought from a flea market in Vermont years ago, when Joel was still in high school and we'd gone up for the foliage. He had helped me lift it into the car, grinning and full of life. That table had held everything from macaroni crafts to funeral programs. That day it held my quiet eviction. I smiled. I nodded. I asked questions like I didn't already understand. The language. I used words like interesting and maybe and thank you for thinking of me. But something in my chest went silent. It wasn't rage. I think people expect us to get angry, to shout or slam doors. But when you've been mother and wife and keeper of birthdays for long enough, you learn that the deepest injuries don't shout, they settle. They fold themselves into your lungs like steam. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the cracked ceiling of the guest room they said I could stay in as long as I needed. That room still smelled faintly like their cat and lavender detergent. My things were in labeled bins in the garage. The good dishes, mine were locked in their dining room cabinet. I thought about how this family used to sit at my kitchen table asking for seconds. I thought about how many times I'd watched my own hands grow more lined while washing the very forks they now used in a house they called their own. And I realized in that still birthday blue night, I was not being cared for. I was being stored like an heirloom, too fragile to throw away, but too inconvenient to keep in sight. I'd always believed in patience. In giving grace, I forgave my late husband his distance. I forgave Joel when he forgot my anniversary 2 years in a row. I forgave the missed calls, the forgotten check-ins, the way my name slowly slipped out of their daily language. But this folder, this was planning my exit in ink. I looked at that paper again the next morning. Camille had left it on the counter in case you want a review. I read the words carefully. Transfer of deed. Power of attorney. Facility options. Facility. As though I were some worn-out appliance. I made coffee. I sat outside with it like I used to when Joel was little, and I'd steal 5 minutes of air before making breakfast. The sky was still a little pink, and the neighbor's sprinkler was hissing across the lawn. I watched the light catch on the edge of their mailbox, and I thought, they want the house. Not just the house, they want control. Of me, of everything I ever built. They smiled through it, of course, always with kindness. That brand of careful tone, the one people use when they're telling you you're no longer capable. But I heard the truth in the silence. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as a phase. Something to handle. A season of life. I have lived through enough winters to know when the frost is not going to lift. So I called my friend Ellen, who used to work in estate law. I asked her if she'd be willing to meet for coffee, just to talk. Didn't tell anyone. Because something told me when people show you the door, even with a smile, you don't fight to stay. You walk out quietly. And then you change the locks. I looked around that day, really looked. The furniture was mine. The paintings on the wall, the ones Camille liked to compliment, were my late sister's. Even the rug in their front room. It's the one their son spilled juice on and they didn't clean properly, had come from my old study. This will all be ours soon, Camille had said once over tea, looking around with that absent-minded satisfaction. She didn't mean to be cruel. She probably didn't even realize she'd said it aloud, but I remembered. And on my 69th birthday, I began the quiet process of reminding them. It would not unless I let it, and I wasn't letting anything go anymore. Not without choosing what stayed mine. The years I gave to my family don't live in photo albums or Facebook timelines. They live in the bone-deep ache that visits my knees on rainy mornings, in the soft hum of the dryer cycling clothes that were never mine. In the way I still wake up at 5:30 out of habit, even when no one is asking for breakfast. I was never the kind of woman who needed to be thanked. But I was the kind who remembered. I remembered every fever, every spelling test, every fight Joel had with the neighbor boy over marbles and kickball and who got to ride shotgun. I remembered to pick up his allergy medicine when he turned 11, the one that gave him stomach cramps if he took it on an empty stomach. I remembered to pack the extra water bottle for his field trips, because the teachers always forgot. I remembered what my husband liked in his lunchbox and what he couldn't stand, even when he stopped kissing me goodbye. I held all those small things, the invisible things like warm stones in my pocket. A mother's kind of inventory. When Joel was 4, I used to kneel on the kitchen floor beside him and help him line up his toy trucks by size and color. I used to tell him every wheel has a path. You just have to let it roll. He repeated that back to me when he was 10, after I got laid off from the floral shop where I'd worked for 9 years. Let it roll, Mom, he said, not quite understanding how hard the bills would be after that. I picked up part-time cleaning work in the mornings, babysat for neighbors in the afternoons. I'd drive across town with Joel, half asleep in the back seat, homework spread across his lap, his little socked feet rubbing against the window glass. No one really remembers that part of the story. They remember the birthdays, the noise, the photos. They don't remember how I skipped meals to make sure Joel never had to explain a lunch ticket. They don't remember that I cut my own hair for almost 12 years so I could afford his summer programs. Or that I let him keep the change, always, even when we were down to nickels in a jar-marked vacation that we never took. When he was 17 and broke his wrist on the football field, I slept in the hospital chair 3 nights straight. I argued with the billing office, made payment plans I couldn't afford. I brought his math homework and spooned soup into his mouth with a gentleness I'd forgotten I had. Joel was my one. It's the only child I ever had. It's the only man who ever looked at me with eyes that held a piece of mine inside them. I remember one winter early on when his father's business had collapsed. The snow was thick that year, heavy enough to snap the gutter right off the porch. We didn't have enough for heat and groceries, so I rationed the canned goods. I remember melting snow in a pot on the stove to flush the toilet. I told Joel it was an adventure, and we camped in the living room under 3 layers of quilts. He never knew how scared I was that the pipes would burst or that the bank would take the house. It's strange how you can give everything, and I mean everything, and still be told later that you've made things complicated. Camille once said that to me gently, after I asked about the holiday plans that didn't seem to include me. It's just that sometimes you make things a little complicated, she said, brushing imaginary lint off her leg. I nodded. I smiled. I folded my hands. She didn't know about the Christmas I pawned my wedding ring to buy Joel a bike he'd circled in a catalog. She didn't know that ring never came back to my finger, or that I cried in the parking lot of the pawn shop. Not because I missed the ring, but because the bike had a red bow on it, and Joel lit up like sunrise when he saw it. No, they don't know, because I never said. Because you don't list out your sacrifices like receipts. You just keep loving. Even after Joel got married, I tried. I bought them housewarming gifts, real things, a stand mixer, towels with monogrammed initials. I made the casserole she liked with the extra rosemary. I took care of their son during flu seasons and school breaks and those awkward gaps in their work schedules when no one else could fill in. They said thank you often. They said you're the best in texts. But something in the way their door began to close more often. Something in the way my calls went to voicemail more frequently. I started to feel like a photo on a distant shelf. Polite, dusty, a presence that once meant everything. Slowly turned decoration. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't push. I adapted, like I always did. It's part even after my fall last year when I cracked a rib reaching for a light bulb in the garage. I didn't call them. I sat in my car until the pain passed, then drove myself to urgent care. When the doctor asked who would be picking me up, I told him I'd drive myself home. Thank you. He looked at me a long moment, then nodded. That's what the things I did for them taught me, I suppose. How to carry weight. How to silence the scream when no one is listening. They always joked that I was the strong one, that I never let anything stop me. I wonder now if that wasn't admiration, but permission. Permission to leave me alone, to assume I would manage. That I didn't need the soft things anymore, invitations, kindness, consideration, but I needed them. I need them still, just not in the way they think. I remember everything, the forgotten favors, the quiet endurance, the way I swallowed disappointment like dry toast, just to keep the peace. I still have Joel's baby blanket folded in a cedar chest in the back room. I run my fingers along the frayed edges sometimes and wonder if he remembers the nights I stayed awake holding him, when he had the croup and couldn't breathe unless I walked him in slow circles around the kitchen. There was a time when my hands were his world, when my voice meant safety, when I mattered completely. That's what I held on to when Camille handed me that folder. Not resentment, memory. It is a different kind of armor. And as I took that first quiet step toward reclaiming what I'd given, I wasn't thinking of revenge or justice. I was thinking of that little boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat, crayon tucked behind his ear, trusting that I would get us home. And now I had to trust myself to take us the rest of the way. Quietly, there wasn't one big goodbye. There never is. When people leave you, they do it in slices. First, it was the morning calls. Joel used to call me every Sunday right around 10 o'clock. He was making eggs and the baby was in the high chair. He'd ask about my week. Nothing long, just enough to keep me tethered. I looked forward to that sound, his voice low and a little rushed, always saying, "Hang on," to someone in the background. But even that was a kind of music. One Sunday, the phone didn't ring. I figured they were out. Maybe a family hike or a last-minute grocery run. The next Sunday passed too, and the silence settled in like dust. I didn't say anything. I told myself he was tired, busy. Young families have a way of being swallowed up in their own whirlwinds. Then came the invitations or lack of them. I found out about a birthday party through Facebook. The photo showed Camille smiling in front of a cake I had once taught her to make. Joel was holding their son, who was turning 5, who was wearing a little paper crown. I'd sewn him one the year before, but it wasn't on his head in that photo. No one had called me. No one had even asked if I was free. It's the kind of oversight you can almost forgive the first time. Almost. So I left a simple comment under the post. Looks like a lovely day. Hope it was fun. Nothing accusatory. It's just a breadcrumb to let them know I saw it, that I was still watching from where they'd left me. Camille liked the comment. That was all. And it continued like that. Slow, fade, missed messages. Promises of "we'll visit soon" that never came. They used to stop by once a week, then once a month, and eventually only when they needed something, a sitter, a casserole, a pickup from the airport when Joel's car broke down. They always said thank you, always smiled, always added, "You're such a blessing." But there's a way people can bless you while slowly erasing you. Like you're only holy when they're tired, only sacred when convenient. I started noticing small shifts in how they spoke to me. Not cruel, never cruel. It's just careful. Detached, they stopped asking for my opinion. If I gave it, they'd nod vaguely and change the subject. If I suggested a book or a recipe, They'd say maybe and never bring it up again. Once, I tried to bring a bag of groceries just because I'd found a sale on that oat milk Camille liked and thought it would be nice. She took the bag at the door and smiled a tight smile. "Thanks, Lorraine," she said. "We're trying not to stockpile too much. Minimalism, you know?" She laughed like it was a joke. But she didn't invite me in. It was 4:30 in the afternoon and I drove home in near silence, the radio off, gripping the wheel a little too tight. I never brought groceries again. Even my own house began to feel like a borrowed coat. Okay? They lived in it like it belonged to them, redecorating, shifting things, labeling bins in my garage without asking. I came home once from a dentist appointment to find that they had cleared out my hall closet, claiming it was too cluttered. That closet held my wedding shawl, my husband's army jacket, Joel's first pair of shoes tucked in a box with his hospital bracelet. I found them all in a pile in the laundry room, stacked like unwanted mail. I didn't say anything. That's the thing about 100 quiet hurts. None of them are loud enough to scream. They accumulate. Like sediment. They layer themselves between your ribs until breathing feels heavier and you don't know why. People think betrayal comes like thunder, a big, bad moment. But no, sometimes it comes like this. Soft hands moving your belongings, soft voices, telling you we're just making space. Soft smiles that say you're lucky to be included at all. The worst part is how easy it is to doubt yourself. I'd sit in my room, the guest room, not mine, and wonder if I was overreacting. Was I too sensitive? Too old-fashioned? Was I supposed to be grateful for any crumbs of inclusion, no matter how cold? I stopped asking questions. I stopped offering opinions. Folded into the corners of their lives like a paper napkin there when needed, tossed when not. The isolation came slow too. Friends I used to meet for lunch began canceling. "You must be so busy with the family," they'd say. "We don't want to intrude." I didn't correct them. What would I say? That I had nothing but time. That my days stretched long and colorless, broken only by the sound of the mail slot and the hum of the washing machine. I filled notebooks with lists just to feel useful, groceries I didn't need, books I meant to read, reminders to check, the water filter. I re-alphabetized my spice rack 3 times in 1 month. Some days I'd drive to the park and sit in my car for an hour just to feel like I had a destination. I watched joggers pass, young mothers with strollers, old couples holding hands, and I wondered where I fit now. One day I overheard Camille on the phone in the hallway. I hadn't meant to listen. I was just walking past, she said. "She's fine. She just needs a little less involvement. It's better this way." Trust me, she wasn't talking about a neighbor. She wasn't talking about a coworker. She was talking about me. I stood there, my hand resting on the stair rail, and let that sink in. Less involvement. Like I was a project that needed downsizing, an old file to be archived. I didn't confront her. I just turned, walked back to my room, and sat down on the edge of the bed, that too soft guest bed that creaked every time I moved, like it resented me. And I knew then that I was being managed, not loved, not needed. Just tolerated, managed. That kind of clarity doesn't explode. Seeps. I began to observe instead of engage. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how they interacted with each other, all smiles and touches, warm energy that seemed to evaporate when I entered the room. I started to recognize that look they gave each other, that slight glance, that barely perceptible shift when I offered to join them on errands or outings. That look that said, "We'll have to include her. It's a terrible thing too." Feel like an obligation. So I stopped offering. I stopped showing up. And they barely noticed. The slow fade of family is not loud. It is soft, almost elegant, like snow muffling everything you once relied on. I kept the silence. I honored the space they so carefully created. But I also began to trace its edges, and I began to make plans. Because even in the quiet, even in the ache of being slowly made invisible, I was still here. And I hadn't forgotten who I was before they began to forget me. The final line wasn't loud either. There was no argument, no slammed doors or red-faced words. It was like most things with them, polite and well-packaged. It came in the mail. A thick, cream-colored envelope tucked in with the grocery ads and the utility bill. I almost missed it, almost tossed it into the junk pile, but something about the weight of it made me pause. There was no return address, just my name carefully, printed in Camille's neat, tidy handwriting. I opened it at the kitchen table, the one I used to host Thanksgiving dinners on. Back when the family was fuller and louder and didn't look through me like I was made of glass, I had a cup of coffee going cold and half a crossword done. The light coming through the window was soft, that strange gray gold of late afternoon when everything feels like it's holding its breath. Inside was a packet of papers, neatly clipped, legal in tone, and a note handwritten, as if that softened it. "We've taken care of some updates," it said. "Just need your signature at the bottom." I flipped through the documents slowly. My fingers started to tremble, just a little. Nothing dramatic. But I felt it like a thread being pulled loose behind my ribcage. They'd drawn up a new trust, one that put the house, my house, in their names. To protect the estate, it said, to avoid complications. I would retain residency, the paper said, but no ownership, no say, no weight. They'd consulted a lawyer, not one I knew, not Ellen, not even one who'd ever asked to meet with me. They had moved forward without me. There was also a medical directive, one that placed Camille in charge. Should I become unable to make my own decisions? It was filled with careful language about compassion and dignity and best interests. It was dated 3 weeks before my birthday. 3 weeks before she smiled at me over tea and said how lucky. They were to have me so close. They'd been planning this for months. I sat there for a long time reading the same lines over and over until the letters started to blur. And all I could think was, they had made their move. Quietly, respectfully, strategically, but a move nonetheless. It wasn't just about the house, it wasn't even about control. It was about permission and the fact that they believed I had no right to withhold it. That my age, my position, my silence had disqualified me from being the author of my own story. That was the betrayal. Not the paperwork, but the assumption behind it. That they could decide for me, that I would go along. That I had become so passive, so softened, that I would just sign and nod and thank them. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. And that, more than anything, told me they had stopped seeing me a long time ago. I looked around the room. Everything in it had a story. The framed needlepoint near the fireplace stitched the year Joel started kindergarten. The grandfather clock my husband and I bought on a whim when we got our first tax return. The sofa I'd saved for a month. After months choosing it over new shoes, over dental work, over anything for myself. This was not just a house. It was a record, a living memory. And they were ready to edit me out of it. I put the papers back in the envelope carefully. I didn't tear them, didn't throw them, just tucked them into a drawer in the hallway. The one that still had the flashlight, the spare batteries, the half-used roll of tape. I didn't say a word to them. Not that night, not the next. Instead, I made an appointment with Ellen. We met in a quiet cafe near the old courthouse. She wore a blazer that still had the faint scent of cedar like her coat closet used to. We ordered tea, and I slid the envelope across the table. She read it with her lawyer eyes, cool, careful, methodical. When she looked up, she didn't speak right away, just nodded. Slowly, "You don't have to sign this," she said, and I nodded too. That was all I needed. It wasn't just the papers, it was the principle, the audacity of it, to write me out while smiling in. To plant their flag in land I had carried alone for years. I remembered the nights I stayed up with Joel during thunderstorms, holding him close because he was afraid of the sound. I remembered the morning I found a raccoon in the attic. And how I coaxed it out myself with nothing but a flashlight and a broom. I remembered cleaning the gutters every fall, hauling heavy ladders, brushing off snow from the porch steps before school so Joel wouldn't slip. Where were they then? And now they wanted it all. Sanitized, consolidated, signed away like a package delivered to the wrong door. But the final line had been crossed. Not just because of what they did. It's because of how easy they made it look. Because of the smile Camille wore when she handed me that birthday tea. The way she complimented the curtains, knowing they were already measuring for their own. Because of the way Joel didn't even bring it up, didn't even have the decency to ask to speak to me like the woman who raised him. 'Cause I wasn't meant to say no. I was meant to comply. And they didn't know me anymore. That, more than anything, gave me back a piece of myself. The part that remembered how strong I used to be. The part that knew how to wait, how to plan. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't yell or confront or explain. I went silent. I began to gather what was mine. And in that stillness, I found a power they had forgotten I ever had. But I hadn't forgotten. Not anymore. There is a silence that feels like giving up. And then there is the silence that feels like gathering. Mine was the second kind. After I slid that envelope back into the drawer, I didn't make an announcement. I didn't sit them down at the dining table for some trembling declaration. I just stopped offering, stopped volunteering information, stopped initiating plans, stopped filling in their blanks. I became still, and I watched what they would do when I no longer filled the space for them. At first, they didn't notice. Joel was always swamped with work, always on another call. Camille kept busy with yoga and volunteering, and that book club she'd joined with the women from the new development. I listened from my room as they made dinner plans with friends, set calendar reminders for school drop-offs. Laughed at shows I used to watch before the TV remote felt like a foreign object in my hand. It's remarkable how easy it is for people to adjust to your absence when they were only ever holding a piece of you to begin with. My silence didn't come from bitterness. That's not who I am. It came from clarity, a quiet, growing clarity that whispered, "They cannot hear you when you explain, so stop explaining." I stopped folding their laundry, used to do it, even when no one asked. Out of that old habit, I couldn't shake the caretaker's twitch. I'd match their socks and smooth the creases in their pillowcases like it meant something, like it kept me relevant. But that week I walked past the basket in the hallway, full sagging, waiting for hands that weren't mine. And I kept walking. I didn't leave notes. I didn't remind them about appointments or the dry cleaning or that Camille's mother's birthday was coming up, the one she always forgot until the last minute. They had taken such care to plan around me. So I stepped out of the center and let them live the version of life they had quietly shaped without me. The first week, nothing changed. The second, a few things slipped. Small things. Joel forgot to set the trash out. Camille burned the rice because she missed the timer. I could have stepped in, had 100 times before, but I didn't. I stayed in my room a little longer each morning. I ate my meals separately. I made tea only for myself. They asked if I was feeling okay, and I smiled that smile women my age learned to wear like armor. "I'm fine," I said, and I was. For the first time in years, I was not explaining myself, not softening my edges to be more convenient. I began sorting my papers at night. I pulled out old folders from the bottom of the linen closet, medical files, mortgage documents, insurance statements. Things I hadn't looked at closely since the year after my husband passed. The files smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Sachet. I ran my fingers along the pages like they were old friends I'd neglected. I called Ellen again. We met at her office this time. Quiet room, clean desk, one large window that looked out over a strip of gnarled trees. She let me talk. She listened with her chin resting lightly on one hand, not interrupting even once. "I want to be clear," I said. "I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being erased." She nodded, and that was enough. We started the process slowly. Nothing rushed. Just little measures, protective ones. The house deed was still mine, and we made sure it would stay that way. A living trust. Specific instructions, witnesses, everything above board. Ellen told me I was smart to act now. Most people wait until after the damage. You're ahead of the storm, she said. And I thought, I've been walking in it for years. I also started saving. I'd been careful before, always had been. The kind of woman who kept coupons in a folder and brought her own bags to the store. But now I saved with intention. Not just money, energy, time, words. Every silence became an act of reclaiming. At night, when the house grew still, I sat with a journal and wrote down what I remembered. Not just from recent years, but from all of it. The smell of Joel's hair after a bath. The sound of my husband's boots on the steps. The taste of the lemon bars my sister used to make. Powdered sugar melting on your tongue. I was archiving myself because they had forgotten. Or maybe they'd never truly known. One evening, I stood at the window while the sun went down. The trees were throwing long shadows across the lawn, and Camille's garden lights flicked on. In rows, she'd planted white hydrangeas last spring. They were blooming now, full and pale, almost glowing. She came up behind me, quiet. I didn't turn. Everything okay? She asked. Lovely evening, I said. She stood there a moment longer, then walked away. She didn't ask again. I think she knew in her way. Knew that something had shifted. But she didn't ask because she didn't want the answer. I didn't offer. It was then I began calling the old bank, the one Joel didn't know about. I hadn't used that account in years. It held the little bit I'd saved after selling. Some of my jewelry. The good pieces. Not the costume stuff. The teller still remembered me. She called me Miss Halberd, even though I told her Lorraine was fine. I deposited a check that afternoon. A small inheritance I hadn't told anyone about. My cousin had. Passed quietly the year before. Left me just enough to matter. I smiled at the thought. They didn't know about the money. They didn't need to. Not every move had to be shared. Not every truth had to be visible. That's the thing about silence. It isn't empty. It's full of the things you finally stopped handing over. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning escape. I was simply returning to myself, taking inventory, gathering the small pieces of strength I had scattered across decades of service, of sacrifice, of staying. Soft when I should have drawn the line. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized I didn't miss them. Not the versions of them they had become. I missed the boy Joel once was. I missed the sound of him bounding down the hallway, yelling about a comic book or a test score. One missed. The man I thought he'd grow into. Eh? But I did not miss the man who handed me legal papers with no warning. I did not miss the woman who thought she was doing me a kindness by managing my decline. I missed being seen. Being known. And if they could not do that anymore, I would. I saw myself now. And that would be enough. I didn't pack my bags or make some dramatic exit in the middle of the night. No suitcase at the door. No final speech in the hallway. I simply began living as if I were somewhere else already. At first, the changes were so subtle, they could be mistaken for nothing. I took longer walks in the morning, real ones, not just the pacing circles of a woman trying to stay useful. I started taking different routes through the neighborhood. I found a little stretch of woods behind the old train tracks, where the wildflowers came up through the broken fence and the trees filtered the light in soft, ribboned silence. I brought a thermos some mornings, sat on a stone and just breathed. No one asked where I'd been. They assumed, I think, that I was just keeping busy. A phrase people like to use when they don't want to know what you're really doing. I started going into town again, the other side of town, not the one with the new cafes and baby boutiques. I went back to the hardware store where I used to get paint samples and talked too long with the woman behind the counter. Mary Ann, who always wore her glasses around her neck like a necklace. She remembered me, said, "You're still kicking, Lorraine?" And I told her more than you'd think. That little comment felt better than any apology Joel had never offered. I reactivated my library card. It had expired for years. Ago, the woman at the front desk was younger than Joel, with tired eyes and a kind voice. I told her I was looking for books on estate planning, elder law, memoir writing, and she gave me a slow blink like she couldn't decide if I was planning to sue someone or reinvent myself. Maybe both, I said, and smiled. I started attending a community class on Thursday's Introduction to Digital Tools for Seniors. We sat in a dim room with mismatched chairs, learning how to navigate cloud storage and how to lock your Facebook. I wasn't there for the tech. I was there to look at people in the eye again, to feel the slow return of my own curiosity. And I started writing. Nothing fancy, just little paragraphs. Pages about childhood, about the scent of my mother's attic, about the first time I ever kissed someone who didn't love me back. It was private mostly. Well, there was power in putting it down. In proving, even just to myself, that I had always been more than a background character in someone else's narrative. Back at the house, Camille kept asking if I wanted to go to the community center with her. They'd started a yoga for balance class. "You'd like it?" she said one morning, pouring her green smoothie into a glass I used to use for fresh. "Orange juice. I've got my own balance class," I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't really want to know. Joel stayed distant. He was around, sure, but there was something even thinner about his presence now. Like he'd handed the whole situation off to Camille and excused himself emotionally. He'd pat my shoulder sometimes when he passed me, make soft noises about, "How are you holding up? And let's get lunch soon." But the words felt like throw pillows, decorative, not meant to be leaned on. I didn't chase him. I didn't drop hints or ask for anything. I just became a quiet shape in their household, and I used that space to move. By spring, I'd met with Ellen twice more. We finalized the trust, and I added a letter to be read only in the event of my death. Not out of pettiness, but so there would be no confusion. So they couldn't say they didn't know. I also opened a small P.O. box at the post office near the high school. Nothing major, just a neutral place to receive some new correspondence from my cousin's estate attorney. From a woman in Maine I'd once worked with, was selling a small cottage and had written to ask if I'd ever thought of moving up north. I hadn't, but now I did. I didn't tell Joel. I didn't tell Camille. I let the thought sit and marinate like a stew on low heat. I called the cottage woman back. Her name was June. We talked for 42 minutes, mostly about snowfall and plumbing. She said she'd hold the place for a few weeks. Said she liked my voice. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone said that to me. That weekend, Joel and Camille hosted a dinner for some neighbors. I stayed upstairs. I heard them laughing, clinking glasses, talking about school fundraisers and property taxes, and which car dealership had the best incentives. No one asked where I was. No one brought a plate up after. I wasn't hurt. I was certain. I was living in their home, but I had already left. The cottage had 2 bedrooms and a wraparound porch. June sent pictures. One of them showed a red kettle on the stove and a small wooden table with a single vase of dried lavender. There was a tree right outside the kitchen window, and it tilted, like it had seen things. Like me, I ran the numbers. I could afford it, just barely, but I could. I withdrew a small portion from the other account, left the rest untouched. Camille asked once if I was feeling distant. "You seem like you're somewhere else," she said. "I am," I replied, and I was. She blinked, looked at me like she wanted a clearer answer, but I just smiled and went back to my book. By then, the house felt like a museum. I was no longer qualified to tour. They'd replaced the rugs. I painted the hallway. Camille rearranged the living room again, said it had better flow now. I didn't argue, simply removed my mother's cross-stitch from the wall before she could ask if it matched the new aesthetic. One day while they were out, I took a photo of myself on the front steps. Just me, just to have it. I looked at it afterward, my face weathered but firm. The house stretching behind me like a monument to a life that had long since shifted out from under it. I wasn't sad. I was preparing. The difference was subtle but real. I moved differently after that. And though no one could see it yet, I knew they would feel it soon. They didn't notice right away. The shift was so quiet, so slow, that at first it must have felt like nothing at all. Like a breeze passing through a room and leaving everything in place until you realized the window had been open too long, and now the air was colder. It started with the calendar. It was a family brunch they planned with Camille's sister, and I didn't offer to make anything. Not the muffins they liked, not the quiche they always expected. I didn't even ask what time they'd be leaving. I was out that morning at the little antique shop by the river, browsing candle holders and old postcards. When they returned, their voices were sharper than usual. Joel said something about the quiche being dry, and Camille said maybe next time. They'd just do it at their place. But I was upstairs putting pressed flowers into an envelope to mail to June, and I didn't feel the need to come down. They began to forget how many little things I used to do until those things were no longer done. Camille asked where the vacuum bags were, and I said I didn't know, though I had bought them for years. Joel missed a bill payment because I wasn't leaving reminders on the notepad anymore. The garbage disposal clogged, and no one knew where I kept the small tool to reset it. It wasn't sabotage. I wasn't being petty. I simply stopped managing the unseen. It was like pulling thread from a sweater. Each tug small, barely noticeable. But eventually something begins to unravel. Joel started getting short with her. I heard it. It's the way he'd say, "Well, Mom usually handled that," and how she'd snap back, "She's not exactly offering." I imagined they thought I couldn't hear through the walls, or maybe they didn't care. I could have reminded him that I handled it because no one else ever did. But I said nothing. Camille left a note on the counter one afternoon. "Could you watch Oliver Friday night?" Just a post-it? Casual? No, please. No, thank you. Just the assumption again that I would rearrange whatever life they thought I didn't have. I took the note and folded it in half, then in half again, and dropped it in the kitchen trash. Friday night came. I didn't leave my room. A Zoom call with the community class. Someone was showing us how to digitize old photo albums. I wore lipstick, just a little, just to remind myself I could. They ended up calling a babysitter from the next street over. I heard Camille apologizing. As the girl arrived, all flustered politeness. Heard Joel groan about how much she charged. I sipped my tea and muted my mic, smiling. I wasn't trying to punish them. I just wanted them to know the cost of what they'd discounted. The days stretched into weeks, and I became less of a fixture. I came and went without notice. Didn't check in, didn't ask where they were headed or what they had planned. I started attending a local writing circle that met twice a month at the Civic Center. We sat in a circle and read things that mattered to us. I brought a piece once about a kitchen drawer full of broken scissors and old batteries. Everyone nodded like they understood exactly what I meant. Joel never asked what I did on Thursdays. The weight of my absence didn't fall all at once. It settled in like dust, hard to breathe in, but easy to ignore until it covered everything. Camille's routines began to stutter. I saw it in the way she double-checked the dishwasher, the way she left sticky notes for herself in places I used to remember things for her. One morning I passed her in the hall and she said, "Did you take the towels out of the dryer?" I said no, and that was the truth. They both started working later, or pretending to. There were more silences between them at dinner, less laughter, more clinks of forks against ceramic. Oliver, bless his heart, started knocking on my door again, asking for stories, asking if I could help him with his model rockets. I told him gently that I was busy now, that he should ask his parents. He frowned. But they're always tired. So was I wanted to say, but I didn't. The garden began to wither. Camille had planted hydrangeas and rosemary with so much ceremony, but she didn't water them properly. The sun scorched their leaves. One of the beds grew over with crabgrass. I watched from the porch and said nothing. Once I saw her searching for the little pruning shears, the ones I kept wrapped in cloth under the sink. She opened every drawer except the right one. Then she gave up. By midsummer, they stopped mentioning. Next year, when making plans, the conversations were smaller, tighter. They didn't ask my thoughts on vacation or holiday meals. Joel barely looked me in the eye anymore. I think he was ashamed, though he wouldn't admit it. I think he felt the shift, but didn't know how to reach across it. They lost more than my help. They lost my memory, the quiet kind. The kind that remembers when someone likes the crusts cut off, or how to reprogram the thermostat when it freezes, or which candle scent Oliver used to fall asleep to when he had a cold. They lost a witness. And they didn't even realize that's what I'd been. I wasn't just a housemate. I was a keeper of origin stories, of quiet traditions no one thought to name. I was the reason the piano got tuned, the one who remembered, to replace the batteries in the smoke detector before they beeped at 3 a.m. Now the piano sat untouched. Smoke detector beeped for 2 days before someone fixed it. They lost the peace that comes from being gently held in someone's constant awareness. The warmth of having someone who thinks of you when you don't. Think to ask for it. That's what they lost without me. Not a caretaker, a center. And by the time they noticed that absence really noticed it, had already become the new shape of things. I didn't gloat, didn't hold it over them. I simply continued living forward. There were days when Oliver still left little drawings. On my door, he never stopped loving me, not really. He just mirrored what he saw. Children do that. I saved every one of them, folded them carefully, and placed them in the same box that once held Joel's old birthday cards. Because even now, I was still the keeper of some things, the quiet things, the real things. But I no longer handed them over freely, and they at last were beginning to feel the cost. I didn't write the letter out of anger. I want that too. Be understood. It wasn't meant as punishment or proof or even warning. I wrote it because something in me needed to put down what had been carried too long without a name. Grief, maybe. Or recognition. Sometimes they blur. It was early September. When I began it, the mornings were cooler by then, and the porch creaked more sharply under my slippers. I brought a blanket out with me and sat at the little metal bistro table. The one Joel had once said was too small for guests, but just right for me. The letter was to him, to my son. Not the man who now avoided my eyes across the hallway, but the boy who used to press dandelions into my palm and ask if they counted as flowers. The boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat, a juice box crumpled in his lap, trusting me to get us home. I wrote slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew it too well. Dear Joel, it began. I paused after that first line for a long time. Long enough for the shadows to shift on the porch and the light to soften into that dusty gold of Nerevening. I am not writing to make you feel sorry. I don't need that. I've lived long enough to know that guilt doesn't grow much. It just weighs things down. I'm writing because I want you to see something. Not just what has happened, but how it happened. The truth is, I was letting go long before you knew it. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. But in those small moments when I stopped being asked, when my place at the table became optional, when my voice started to feel like background noise to your real life. And it hurt. I'm not ashamed to say that. It hurt in a way that settled deep. The kind of pain that doesn't scream, it just stays. You didn't mean to do it, I know that. Okay? Most forgettings aren't intentional. They happen the same way rust grows on metal. Slow, silent, inevitable if you don't keep it dry and watched over. But I also know this. Intention does not erase. Impact? You trusted Camille. I understand that. She is capable in the way people like to reward, efficient, organized, composed. And I'm sure she believed what she was doing was for everyone's benefit. That I would appreciate being taken care of, as if that were the only role I had left to play. But I was not consulted. I was not asked. I was moved like a fixture, inherited like a piece of property, evaluated, planned for, and set aside with careful manners. Do you know how that feels, Joel? To be spoken about in rooms you're not invited into? To open a folder with your name on it and realize your voice was never required. I do, and yet I do not write this letter to shame you. I write it to remind you that I was not always this version you see now, that once I was a woman with fire in her bones and laughter that filled entire rooms, that I danced in kitchens and wept into recipes and built a home with hands that bled and healed and bled again, that I carried you through every fever and fear and school project and heartbreak, that I folded myself down small for years so that you would have room to rise, and that somewhere along the way you stopped seeing that woman. You started seeing a role, a responsibility, an eventual burden. And so I became one, not by age, not by ailment, but by perception. You and Camille began preparing for the end of me long before I had finished becoming. And that is the part I want you to hear, not to change the past, but to guard the future, because I am still here, still whole, still learning, still writing, still moving, still choosing. And I have chosen now to reclaim what remains, not just the house, not just the papers, but the essence of myself. My life has been made of the invisible work, the unseen kind, the things people forget to thank you for until they stop being done. I accepted that for a long time. I even found meaning in it. But I will not be erased, not quietly, not politely, not while I still have breath and memory. I love you. That has never changed. But love, real love, cannot grow in a space where one person disappears to make room for the others. So I stepped back, not to punish you, to remember myself. And I hope one day you will want to remember me too, not just as the woman who folded your socks, but as the woman who showed you what resilience looks like when no one is watching. Take care of yourself, Joel. Love, Mom. When I finished, I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I felt something settle. Not peace, exactly, but alignment. I didn't send the letter, not right away. I placed it in an envelope and set it in the cedar box under my bed, the same one where I kept Joel's old drawings, my wedding ring, and the newspaper clipping from the day my mother passed. Some words are meant to be held before they're released. But that letter changed me. The writing of it. The seeing of it. It reminded me that I am still allowed to narrate my own story, that I am not a footnote in theirs, I am a full page. And whether they ever read it or not, I had spoken the truth, softly, but with my whole chest. Later that week, I sat on the porch again, same blanket, same table. Camille walked by on her way to her car. She paused and said something about the weather turning. I smiled and nodded. She hesitated like she might say more. But she didn't, and I let her go, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who has finally written the thing that mattered most, and knows now what it means to be heard even, if only by herself. The house is still here, but it's quieter than it used to be. Not the heavy quiet of being ignored or dismissed. That kind of silence holds its own kind of noise. No, this quiet is lighter, intentional, like something you choose when you finally remember that you're allowed to. I wake up early still. That hasn't changed. My body knows the rhythm of dawn. I no longer rush into usefulness. I brew my coffee slowly, watching the steam rise from the mug like a soft whisper. I sit on the porch with a shawl over my shoulders, and I listen. Sometimes to birdsong. Sometimes to nothing at all. Some days I don't say a single word until afternoon, and it doesn't feel strange. There is no urgency anymore. Camille and Joel still live on the other side of the house, but they move differently now. They knock. Before coming in, they ask before assuming. I can tell they feel the space I claimed back, even if they don't have the language for it. Oliver comes around still. He's gentle in the way only some children are soft-tied and honest. He doesn't ask why I don't come to dinner as often. He just crawls up beside me on the porch steps sometimes, resting his head against my arm. We talk about clouds or bugs or what he's building next in school. He told me last week that he missed my stories. I told him maybe one day I'd write them all down. Maybe I already have. Joel has been quieter since the summer passed. He makes more effort now, offers to fix things I haven't asked about. Mentions his day, sometimes stalling near my door like he's working up to something. Maybe he's read the letter. I haven't asked. I don't need to know. I don't hold resentment anymore. There's a fine line between memory and bitterness, and I've learned how to walk it gently, because the truth is, none of them knew how deep I went, how many layers a woman can carry inside her, how much she can bury to keep the peace. They only saw what surfaced. The helper. It's the keeper of routines. The yes woman in the background. They never saw the garden of thought I tended in silence. Now I let it bloom. I journal nearly every evening, not out of discipline, but instinct. I write little things: what the sky looked like at dusk, how the tea tasted, what I remembered from childhood as I folded the laundry. I don't write for anyone else now. I write for the part of me that sat still for decades, waiting to be. Named, I've started growing rosemary by the window. I clipped the dead leaves from Camille's garden myself, gently, one by one. They'd gone brittle by the end of August, left too long in their own wilt. It felt like closing a chapter. I use the rosemary in my cooking again, just for me. I don't host anymore. Not because I've closed myself off, but because I no longer perform my presence for anyone. If I invite someone into my space now, it's because I want to, not because I've been asked to fill a gap. Ellen and I still talk. We meet once a month at a diner off Route 3. She always orders the same thing: turkey sandwich, no mayo, and one black coffee. I bring her updates, not grievances. She tells me I look younger somehow. I tell her I feel older, but in a good way. Like something has settled into its right shape. I haven't made a decision yet about the cottage in Maine. June's still holding it for me last I checked. We write letters now, real ones, not emails. Oh. I keep hers tucked in a wooden box by the bed. She sent me a pine cone once, from the forest, behind her house. Said it reminded her of the shape of certain truths, small, layered, sharp if you're not careful, but lovely in the right light. Maybe I'll go. Maybe I won't. The point is, I could. And that possibility, that breath of open door is more freeing than anything I've felt in years. Sometimes I wonder what it might have been like if things had gone differently. If Joel had asked instead of assuming. Camille had seen me as a woman, not a function. They had said, "What do you want, Lorraine?" and really meant it. But those thoughts don't stay long. It's because this version of life, this quiet, gentle unfolding, is mine now. I don't need to be needed to feel worthy. I don't need to be busy to feel alive. I don't need their plans to have a path of my own. I read more now, walk slower, rest longer. My world has narrowed in the best way. Less noise, more depth. I look at shadows on the wall and see paintings. I listen to the hum of the refrigerator and call it company. I keep a jar of stones on my windowsill, each one picked up during a walk, held in my palm for a while, then placed there as a reminder. I was here. I chose this. I made it count. There's a freedom in knowing you survived the quiet dismissal of people you once would have done anything for and still managed to rise with grace. There's no parade for that. No applause. But there is peace. A kind of peace you don't get from being loved for what you do. Only from being known, truly known for who you are. I think Joel might be learning that now, slowly, in his own time, and that's fine. We don't heal on the same calendars. Camille remains polite, careful. I don't falter for it. She was raised in a world that teaches you to manage women like me, not listen to us. But I'm not bitter, because my silence taught me something louder than any confrontation ever could. It taught me that dignity doesn't shout, it just endures. And now, when I stand at the edge of this life I've remade, not wealthy, not grand but fully mine, I feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Stillness without ache. I wasn't angry, was finally empty, and that was beautiful. I don't know exactly when I stopped waiting for them to change. There wasn't a specific day or a final straw. It happened the same way sleep comes slowly at first, then all at once. I just woke up one morning and realized I'd stopped, scanning every moment for signs of remorse, for a crack in the distance between us, for the apology that never quite made it into the room. I still live here, for now. The house is mine, in name and in law, and more importantly, in memory. And for the first time in years, it actually feels like it. It's not about control. It's about presence, that quiet knowing that you belong to yourself, that no one else's permission is needed to claim your own life. I dust the shelves now not because I'm keeping order for someone else, but because I like the way the light hits the clean wood in the morning. I cook what I want when I want. Some days it's just toast and tea. Other days it's a full roast for no occasion at all. It's plated beautifully. For me, not out of vanity, but out of reverence. It's a kind of daily reminder that I am worth feeding in every way. Some afternoons I walk to the lake down the road. It's nothing special, just a little patch of water tucked between sycamores and a sagging bench. But I go anyway. The breeze there carries something quiet, something unspoken. And I sit with it, watching the ripples change shape and thinking about how little attention they need to be beautiful. There's an older man I see there sometimes. We don't speak much, a nod, a glance. His name is Walter, I think, or maybe Wallace. One day I'll ask. But for now, we simply share the space. Two people who've learned that stillness isn't the absence of life, it's where life begins again. Back at home, Camille keeps to herself more these days. Joel tries now and then, but it's clear he doesn't quite know how to be in this new landscape where I am not waiting for his lead. I think he's unsettled by it, not angry, just unsure. I watch him sometimes, hovering near the threshold of conversation, and then I let him drift back into his orbit. He's trying, I suppose, in his way. But I've stopped making myself into a bridge for other people's crossing. Oliver is still a soft point in my heart. He runs in sometimes breathless and bright, his hair always a little wild. He brings me questions about the world, about stars, about the shapes clouds make. He doesn't know it yet, but those questions are small, sacred invitations, the kind only a child can offer, before the world teaches them to hide curiosity under caution. I answer what I can, and when I can't, we make things up together. Last week he asked me if I believed trees could talk. I told him I don't think they speak in words, but I think they remember, like you, he asked. And something in my chest loosened. Yes, like me. I think that's what I've become now, not the active, busy kind of woman I once was. Not the ever-present caretaker, but something more rooted. It's a memory keeper. A place where the stories don't vanish. I've begun writing again, not just in my journal, but with more shape. I'm working on something I've tentatively titled Inheritance Without Permission. It's not for publishing, not really, just for the act of forming what was once blurred. Giving language to the invisible years helps. Writing always does. It doesn't fix anything, but it gives shape to the pain and to the power that quietly grew beneath it. I don't flinch at their footsteps anymore. I don't pause when I hear them whisper in the other room, wondering what I'm thinking. Because I'm not thinking of them in the way I used to. I'm thinking of my mother, her worn hands folding linens just so. Her soft voice reciting psalms in the kitchen, not out of religion, but rhythm. I'm thinking of the first house I ever lived in, where the wallpaper peeled and the windows rattled. Of the friend I once loved but never told. Of the scent of rain on blacktop and how it always made me want to call someone, though I never knew who. I remember now, that is more than enough. There's no vindication, no grand resolution, no tearful confrontation with Joel or Camille in the living room. Those things belong to fiction. In real life, people keep living beside each other, even when the love has shifted into something more distant, more muted. And you learn to live with the space between what was and what is. And still, I am content. Not in the easy way. Not in the magazine advertisement, everything is solved way. but in the way of someone who has survived herself and chosen to stay. Sometimes I still talk to my husband, not out loud, just in the way memories move through you. I think he'd be proud. Not because I fought back, but because I stayed upright. Because I didn't lose the thread of myself, even when it felt frayed and invisible. I found it again, and I wove it into something new. I have a stack of old letters on my nightstand now. Some I've written to people who are gone. Some too. People still living who'll never read them. One to my younger self. That one took the longest. It began simply, "You will be loved less quietly one day." But not by them, by yourself. And that's where the story ends, I think. Not with a bang or a door slamming, but with a woman in a house she made, sitting by the window, holding her own hand in memory. My life is quiet now. And that's more than enough.